Good morning, everyone. I'm now going to commence the webinar. My name is Paul Hewitt, and I'm the VP for UK and Ireland for Visual Solutions. So the title of my webinar today is the business benefits of effective requirements management. And this webinar aims to present the business case on how to introduce effective requirements management and how it will reduce project costs through the sharing of critical information within a collaborative working environment. Before I start the webinar, I just want to go through a few housekeeping issues. So during the actual webinar itself, all of your microphones will be switched off. So you won't be able to communicate with us. If you have any questions that you would like to ask or you want to raise during the webinar, please can you use the online chat window, and what we'll aim to do is answer any of your questions at the end of the webinar. So with that, I will start the webinar. So there is strong evidence to support the case that reducing requirement errors and omission may be the most single effective action that developers of complex systems and projects can take to improve project outcomes and assist in our goal of delivering quality systems on time and within budget. To understand the real business benefits of effective requirements, we need to look at some of the areas where we would expect to see cost savings if we were to introduce effective requirements management. So with that, I'll just go through now the agenda that we're going to follow for this session. So first of all, I'm going to go through, well, what do I mean by requirements management? And the objective here is to really just to calibrate you in terms of what I mean by requirements management in my context, if you like. Then I'm going to go through, well, what are the business benefits? What areas are we looking at where you can actually get cost benefits of effective requirements management? And the areas where I've actually quantified these business benefits are things like the real-time access to project information, and we look at some of the how that actually saves time and money. Then we look at the system requirements reuse and the benefits you can get from actually reusing established requirements from previous projects. And then we look at the benefits of requirements traceability and also information version management, and that's really talking about ensuring that you're working on the current or the correct version of the information. Then we will look at the cost savings associated with traceability matrix production, so the production of traceability matrices within the project. And then we look at test planning and the link between requirements and tests and how that can also save money within projects. And also having open view of risk management and having the identified risks be presented as a shared resource that everyone who needs to see it on the project can have access to that information or open access to that information. And then also looking at engineering report production and how we can actually automate that rather than it be an offline exercise for someone to do. And then finally on this section, production of deliverable contract documentation specifications, and we'll cover that in a little bit more detail later. An additional item that has really come to my attention more recently, so certainly during the last 6 months, is also the value of capturing and maintaining your intellectual property. And that's really a way of capturing it in a way that should your experts decide to leave the organization or leave the project, that that information is in some way captured by the organization as an asset. Then we go through really a summary of the cost justification on why you get value from effective requirements management and then I go through briefly some conclusions. So that's what we're going to cover today. So I hope you find this relevant to your current activities. So before we start, let's talk about what is requirements management. I want to show you this Dilbert cartoon, which I'll let you read before I continue my presentation. So anyway, I'm sure that one or two of you may be able to relate to that. But anyway, what do I mean by requirements management? Well, let's first of all look at this chart I've got now displayed now. So very often, from my own experience of past projects, information held in projects tends to be what I term autonomous islands of information. And very often this information is captured in Word documents, Excel, notes, notepads, minutes of meetings, PowerPoint presentations, and nowadays even things like email and Twitter are starting to come into play. And then on the far right-hand side, of course, you've got the need or demand for project management metrics and information derived from the project to see how far through the activities we are. But at the end of the day, when you have these autonomous islands of information, they're not connected. They tend to be connected, by the individuals that communicate it, but they're not directly connected. So what we're advocating, and so my view of requirements management is to take these islands of information and actually bring them into some sort of order to actually link the information together. But most importantly here, we're not linking the information together at document level. We're integrating or linking the information together at individual statement level within the documents. So we actually start to really build up this view of traceability between documents based on the information that is held within those documents. So in general terms, or in summary of this chart, it's a case of moving what I term chaos into some sort of order, where by establishing this traceability, we can actually start to really look at the impact that if one requirement changes in one document, what other requirements in other documents are going to be touched or impacted by that potential change or that proposed change. So that is my immediate view of requirements management. So let's move on now to looking at some of what I term the business benefits. And the idea of this slide in particular is to give you an idea of what we mean by business benefits. Where are we looking to see business benefits, obviously in terms of cost savings and efficiencies. So we're looking at the business benefits in terms of time saving, obviously to try and reduce time of rework, etc. Looking at improvement in efficiencies and productivity, and in achieving the first three, then we look at how we can improve quality on the back of that. And then the next one being really important is to establish a collaboration, a collaborative environment where people can truly share information and move away from what I previously described as this concept of islands of information. And by achieving the above, then we will also start to introduce the potential cost savings, where we're ensuring that everyone's always working on the most up-to-date version of information, that everyone is given the information they need on which to make their informed business decisions. And we also want to have everyone have a complete view of the information that is available within the project. And then the next one, capturing IP, capturing your intellectual property, and I'll cover that one in more detail toward the end of this presentation. And if you achieve all of the ones above, then the one thing that does fall out of the bottom is customer satisfaction. You will get improved customer satisfaction because they'll have this sense that you understand their requirements and that you're acting upon their requirements. So where are the areas where we would expect to see business benefits? So What we've done here, what I've done here is identified some of the headings, some of the primary headings where you would expect to see cost benefit and business benefit through requirements management. So things like requirements reuse, requirements traceability, the production of traceability matrices, which are often demanded during the life of a project, planning for tests, your test planning, ad hoc production of management metrics reports, and finally automated production of contract deliverable documents. Now on these ones, I have actually from a study, just to give you a bit of a background on the study that I've been doing, this is a result of about 15 or 16 years worth of work, and in discussion with some large organizations who I've worked with in the past, including the likes of Lockheed Martin, BAE Systems, British Airways, and these larger organizations where they have applied effective requirements management. And in terms of the quantification of the time savings, this was based on, well, very often these companies won't just give you that information because they regard it as commercial in confidence. They regard it as part of their competitive advantage. So what we did is we would actually present our own assessment and analysis of the savings that were achieved. And when we first distributed the information to these various organizations, to say that we had some fairly robust responses was an understatement. They would throw them out saying, that's ridiculous, there's no way we're going to achieve those type of savings, or no way we've actually achieved those type of savings. So what we did is we did it very much on an iterative process. So by repeating the information and refining the data and keep representing it, when we got to a point of what I term least resistance, when we got to a point where the customers were largely mute, where they disagreed not so aggressively, if you like, we knew that we were then getting fairly close to the type of savings they were actually achieving, as best we could anyway. Notice also here that during the presentation, these are the headings where we've actually achieved some sort of quantification of the benefits. There are some additional headings that we introduced during this webinar that don't have the time savings posted, where we've not been able to really get positive feedback on the actual time savings, but we know absolutely that cost benefit and time savings have been achieved in these other areas that are not quantified. So with that, I'll move on, and hopefully you'll find this of value. So the first area is what we term real-time access to project information, and this is about capturing one instance and one version of the project information, which is captured in a single integrated repository, which is made available to everyone in the project who needs access to it. And this, we've discovered, promotes significant productivity and quality improvements. It saves time, particularly when introducing new people into the project. So one of the most daunting tasks facing any engineer or project manager is taking on an existing project, is finding out just where the information exists within that project. This can often be both time-wasting and counterproductive as an activity for even the most seasoned and capable of system and project managers. So we can simplify this process by making all of the relevant engineering information available in a single integrated central database or repository that can be accessed by everyone in the project who needs to have access to it. Again, we've not been able to quantify this particular item because based on lots of discussions that we had with customers, we could never really get a definitive statement on the actual savings achieved by having this facility. But what they all did agree with, that it did definitely save time and effort by having everything in one place that everyone can access, so they can't they can't not have sight of information on which they make decisions. So the next area that we looked at was system requirements or project requirements reuse. And here we identified from the analysis savings of about 25% by being able to reuse data from previous projects. And that also means that when we start a new project, we are never starting from a purely clean sheet of paper. We are actually starting with some artifacts, some information which we've developed on previous projects. And the objective here also is, if we made errors on the previous project and we repaired those errors, what we don't want to do is reproduce and reintroduce those errors when we reuse that information on the next projects. So it's important that we understand that the information is being reused, obviously, from successful projects. So to be able to easily access and reuse requirements and their associated verification criteria, achieving significant productivity improvements on new projects, particularly at the beginning of the projects, and also, as I mentioned, to ensure that we don't reintroduce errors that we've seen before. So increasingly, organizations are looking towards large-scale reuse as a way of improving productivity, raising quality, and reducing project delivery timescales. It is recognized, however, that this can only be achieved through the introduction of best practice or system engineering best practice or project management best practices, rather than ad hoc reuse of data held in project archives. Planning for reuse needs to happen during the early stages of the project, and capturing a central repository in a form which is easily accessible by project engineers. Capturing this reusable data in bounded Microsoft Word and Excel documents is often not good enough to promote and encourage effective reuse of information. Effective and flexible reuse needs to occur at individual requirement statement or item level rather than whole document level. Capturing reusable artifacts in a collaborative database allows this reuse to be managed and categorized and controlled at individual requirement statement level. And because it is captured in a central repository, the information is available to the whole project team as and when they need it. And this was from this iterative process, we established that the savings of the effort resulted in savings of about 25%. One study actually concluded that the reuse allowed organizations to use personnel more effectively because it leverages expertise and moves the focus to the new customer requirements rather than the ones that have already been covered by the common platform, which is very often used as the basis for the new project anyway. So now we're going to go to look at requirements traceability. And in this area you can see that again from the analysis, introducing requirements traceability motivated savings of about 90%. So quickly identified, we can quickly identify what is touched by any requirements change in one document and how that impacts on requirements across the other associated project documents. So engineers typically maintain traceability information independent of the actual requirements and design data, either in the form of a spreadsheet, a simple database, or even on paper using a manual process. This information may take from several minutes to several hours to identify for each entity being traced. If the engineer must also refer to the baseline specifications in addition to raw engineering data, this traceability or this trace activity can be even more protracted. So by using a shared requirements repository, the project is assured of automatic traceability once the data is entered and the appropriate relationships are established. If we consider the following example where a project manager asks a system engineer to ascertain the impact of changing a particular requirement or system performance item, done manually, this is usually very time-consuming and actually quite tedious, involving document searches and possibly meetings with other people, some of which are no longer involved with the project. So we provide the ability to capture this information as history and gives you all the background and design rationales as to how we actually achieve some of those requirements in the first place. So that's the first one of the bigger cost-benefit savings. So the next item, and carrying on from that, I often talk about how we manage the stakeholder expectations. These are the stakeholders who develop the requirements in the first place. And notice here, the stakeholder requirements are defined from KPI drivers, so key performance indicators that the stakeholders themselves may be driven by. And then we've got this view of real needs versus expressed needs versus perceived needs. All of these come into what I term stakeholder requirements. But as we all know, stakeholders take many forms. So the most obvious stakeholder that I would mention, of course, is our customer. You know, our customer being the primary stakeholder for any new requirements. But the other stakeholders include our marketing department. So where we develop a business strategy on you know, where do we want to take our company, where do we want to emphasize our product deliverables. So marketing could have an impact. And then we've got our own business rules that we have to follow in running our projects. And then after that you get things like standards and regulation. All of these become stakeholder inputs that need to be taken account of in the project. Security is another one, particularly in banking and the aerospace and defense market sector and government fields, where security considerations is also very important. And then finance, well, of course, every project has to be bounded by some sort of cost constraint. So there are certain elements of the project which finance would be very interested in getting information on a regular reporting basis. And quality, the quality control department and maintenance, to name a few. I mean, there are probably many other stakeholders that you can think of. But what's important here is, having captured the stakeholder requirements, how do we now explicitly trace those to how they're being dealt with within the system or the project deliverables? And this is important because we need to ensure that every single stakeholder requirement is in some way that you can see that how it traces down to the system or project requirements, how they in turn transition trace down to the subsystem design and implementation. But also on the right-hand side of the screen here is how we confirm the validation or satisfaction of those requirements. And the other important, I was talking to a project manager when she'd given a presentation about how she manages stakeholders. And it was very interesting because she said that one of the most important thing is ensure that you communicate with the stakeholders on project information which is relevant to their KPI drivers, to their areas of interest, to their requirements. But what's also important is make sure also that you don't share too much information with them which is absolutely not relevant to their area of interest, because you will lose their interest in the project, you will lose their commitment to the project, and obviously that could itself have a detrimental impact on the project success. So make sure that what you communicate to each stakeholder is actually relevant to their area of interest, and actually establishing this explicit traceability. The explicit traceability to these things means that you can maintain that focus. Also in here you can introduce the concept of project risk, have the project risk register, and of course we also notice that project risks can actually be motivated by actually any one of these documents, any one of these bits of information that are used within the project. So having the project risk register available here, that everyone and anyone who needs to see it can see this information, we can also start to collectively think what actions we can take to mitigate against some of these risks. So it is important here that we maintain explicit traceability from each of the stakeholder requirements to how they are being satisfied within the project, and that we can report on that satisfaction at any time in real time back to those stakeholders. and that also means that we're not reporting information which is not in any way connected to their project. So it maintains focus on their area of interest and their KPIs. So moving on to the next one, which is information version management. Again, on this particular one, I've not been able to quantify it accurately. I did get fairly random responses back, and again, they accepted the fact there was cost savings, but the spread of the savings identified was so wide that it wasn't a figure I could usefully use in this presentation. So it's all about working on out-of-date information that can consume unnecessary time and effort, which can so easily be avoided. So maintaining one instance and one version of the truth in a central repository. The other challenge that many projects faced was ensuring that everyone who was working on the project was working on a correct version. So by maintaining a record of who changed what and when provides a useful history and context of why changes occurred, and it also allows the projects to monitor and assess requirements volatility. You know, how frequently is one requirement changing, for instance? Then we need to consider, we need to go to the source of that requirement change rather than just look at the requirement maybe at face value. And we can, on the back of that, produce metrics and cost savings to motivate an effective version management, which can be difficult to manage in particularly larger organizations. So moving on to the next one is the production of traceability matrices. Now this is something that often gets called upon where we want to ensure that every stakeholder requirement is in some way or has in some way been addressed, or has in some way been linked to something which is achieving that requirement, obviously moving towards the objectives or project deliverables out of the projects. So here we need to ensure absolute compliance with things like standards, regulations, and obviously your contracted customer requirements. And it's vital that traceability matrices and reports can quickly be produced at any time, ideally in real time. And you notice on the left-hand chart here, you notice the arrows connecting, in this case, a stakeholder requirement with maybe a system requirement. The arrows in blue identify the fact that no changes have occurred to either end of those requirements since the last baseline. Notice the ones, though, that are characterized in red, and that tells you that we call that a suspect link, and that tells me that either the stakeholder requirement or the associated system requirement has, for whatever reason, changed since the last baseline. And of course, if that occurs, we need to go back and look at the nature of the change and understand whether that change had some sort of impact on the requirements that we may have been responsible for. For instance, if a system requirement changes, the question we have to ask here is, are we still compliant with the original stakeholder requirement? If the answer is yes, then of course we can clear that suspect and move on. If the answer is no, then we clearly will probably have some additional work to do. And again, here, typically in the past, trying to find that type of traceability using what I termed earlier, my autonomous islands of information, can take enormous amounts of time doing it manually. So here they estimated that if we can do this in real time and it's maintained as an integral part of the project information, that it was achieving savings of up to 99% as compared with trying to get that traceability information manually. Another way of looking at that same information is showing the information across documents. So here you've got some stakeholder requirements linked to system requirements, which in turn are linked to subsystem requirements. And across on the other side of the screen there, on the other side of the V, if you remember, is how those requirements link to tests. And here we've got some information about the link of individual requirements to tests showing their status. The green one shown here in the middle there shows that has passed its test and it's fine. The red one shows where a test has failed, and the yellow ones show where the test is pending or looking for additional information, with obviously on the right hand side showing the descriptions associated with each of those requirements. But again, this is real-time information that can be accessed and indeed reported on at any time. Okay. So the next one is test planning, and this is representing the link really between requirements and test cases. And here we need to ensure that every single requirement is in some way measurable and or testable, and directly linked to a test or validation criteria, which can automatically be issued as a report and will improve quality and save time. Now the basic question here is, if someone provides you with a requirement which is not measurable, is not testable, then of course it does bid the question whether it is indeed a requirement at all. The other thing here is, if you are subcontracting work out or you're delegating work out to an outsource provider, then my advice very often is, don't only supply that external party with just the requirements. Also, if it's possible, supply them with information on how you're going to test to prove that they are compliant with those requirements. The benefit of doing this is, one, it validates that the requirements are, of course, in some way measurable or testable, but two, it further reduces the opportunity for reinterpretation or misinterpretation of the original requirement, because you're not just defining the requirement, you're also defining how you anticipate proving compliance against that requirement. And as I said at the bottom right hand corner there, no test planning equals plan to fail. Again, the feedback we had by maintaining this traceability between requirements and validation and verification information, but actually produced savings of 60% as compared with well, not doing it at all, or trying to achieve this manually. So that was another example. And the next area was risk management. Again, this is another one where we try to get people to quantify where in large projects they have a risk manager looking at the looking at the risks associated with the project. So risks, of course, can be motivated by requirements from any part of the project. Linking risks and risk mitigation information should be an integral part of the project management process, which can be centralized and, of course, made visible to all at any time. And by actually centralizing the information, so looking at things that things that motivate the risk, which can, of course, come from any of the requirements held in any of the documents, we can actually start to look at how we can mitigate against those risks. Not just one person, but anyone in the team who's associated with running the project. So risk management becomes an integral part of the project management process, which is controlled throughout the project management lifecycle. So project risk management reports can be produced at any time during the project on demand. So the next one I've got is engineering report production, and this is to do with delivery of metrics information to automatically produce up-to-date and consistent information on project status and metrics, which when produced manually consumes unnecessary time and effort from sometimes some of your most skilled and valuable staff members. So things like how many of the stakeholder requirements have been traced to something, how many of the system requirements have been linked to a verification or test criteria, and to be able to report on that information in real time based on what we've recorded within the database is extremely valuable, and therefore continues to free up your critical project resource to do the productive stuff that you actually want them to do, rather than go offline half a day before a really important management meeting to say, can you get this information together for me, which is not necessarily productive from what they want to do, so you can report to the senior management. This becomes a real-time saving, but I think we've been fairly conservative here with 20% time savings, but it's been regarded as relatively small because sometimes reporting, sometimes it's done weekly, but more frequently reporting is done maybe monthly. So it's not something that consumes lots of effort, but when it is needed, it does consume resource. And so the next level up is the production of contract deliverable documentation. And this is also to avoid consuming valuable engineering resource for the production of the final customer specification documents, when this could be automated as an output of the requirements tool. And what is also important here is because we're getting the documentation from the central repository, we are reporting here on the as delivered system, not the as specified system. And that's a very important point to make, and I want you to just think about what I've just said there briefly. The reporting on the as delivered system, not the as specified system. And the reason that clarification is so important is because as with all projects, change happens during the life of the project. Change happens, which means that what we specify at the outset is not necessarily representative of what gets delivered at the end, because change happens. So by actually maintaining this view of change, maintaining the steps that have gone from the specification stage to the deliverable stage, and then having a central repository that reports on the as delivered system, means that we truly can reuse some of that information for the next generation of project. It means that all of our manuals, all the documentation we need to supply with the delivered system or service will have documentation that reflects the as delivered output rather than the as specified output. And we estimated here representing actually time savings of about 40% in the ability to automatically produce the final project documentation based on the as delivered system. So moving on, the next one was the concept of introducing more formal processes to drive your requirements management. And here is a good example of showing you the documents in a typical project and how they are linked together and the relationships that exist between these documents, or indeed the items that exist within the documents. But by producing this information from one project, it gives us the opportunity to repeat processes on future projects. It also means we can refine where a process or a link has not been what the project demanded. If we make a change to that process or that link, then we can ensure that that good event gets reflected in the next generation project, and that we don't keep repeating errors from previous projects. And obviously you've got again the project risks being motivated by, it could be it's shown motivated by the user requirements or stakeholder requirements and the system requirements. In reality, of course, project risk can be motivated by any of the documents that exist within a project. So it establishes repeatable processes for managing requirements across projects, providing an opportunity for measured improvements and information reuse. So the next thing I want to talk about, and this is, as I mentioned at the beginning, was something that I've encountered literally during the last 6 months. And this, I've got to, just to elaborate this with a story. So I went into an organization, and they'd got the organization had been going for just about 30 years. And 30 years ago when they started, there was this guy who was the guy who came up with, he was the guy who came up with the original ideas of the design of the product they had developed, and he ultimately became the chief engineer. And this company didn't do a lot in the way of documentation, so very often if they wanted to create a new or next generation of an existing product, this chief engineer would go down to the manufacturing floor or the production facility, and he would actually say to the production staff, right, what I want to do now is I want you to produce a box just like the one we've already got, or just like the equipment we've already got, but we're going to add on these 2 new features or these 2 new things. And it was almost done there as a communication on the shop floor. And lo and behold, the new product came out with the 2 new features with very little documentation to support it. Well, what happened was, during the last 6 months, this key individual, this chief engineer, has made a decision that he wanted to move on. He wanted to have a change of life and actually leave the organization. What was worse than that, in fact, that despite his 30-year tenure in his contract of employment, he only had to give 1 month of notice to leaving. And of course, the senior management went fairly white-faced because they realized that this individual had a huge amount of their intellectual property captured in his brain, and that was just about to walk out the door. That was the thing that actually has motivated them now to think about having a more formal requirements management environment where they can capture this critical information that's critical to their business. So as I said here, experts leave organizations all the time, and we've got to ask, have you captured the IP, the intellectual property that you've paid them for during their tenure? And capturing and maintaining this intellectual property is vital to the continued success of all organizations. So you must ensure that it's captured before it walks. Again, very difficult on this one to actually give a percentage saving or to quantify this, but I think we can all accept that the potential loss or indeed the cost of walking IP is real. And as I mentioned also at the beginning, that this whole document, this study that I'm doing, it's not a static thing. I see this as an evolving picture, and I have a report that backs this information up, and this report is a living document for me. So it is still, although I've been working on it for now nearly 16 years, it's still evolving. To this day, I'm still refreshing it with new information that I encounter when I'm talking to customers. So now let's go through some of the conclusions. So hopefully you found this information of relevant, and you can understand, or you're beginning to understand now, areas where you would expect to see cost savings, expect to see cost benefit by the effective introduction of formal requirements management processes. So going through the points I've raised here, as you can see from the analysis above, there are many areas where the introduction of formal requirements management environment would bring quantifiable improvement to the management of projects. As discussed, there are many areas where business benefits will be realized through the introduction of more effective requirements management. Depending on your specific circumstances or customer circumstances, we believe that it is possible to construct a clear and justifiable business case for introducing a more robust requirements management environment, supported by tools that can deliver so much more than Word and Excel, or those autonomous islands of information that may be captured in various forms. So you can then maintain a complete record of the as-built system rather than the as-specified system, ensuring that all of the support documentation that results from the project activity is reflected in the system as delivered. By collating the information above, it means that you can actually realize the types of savings that could be achieved by the introduction of this environment. The reuse of existing information on known standards and common system requirements and common system components provides a consistent foundation for all new projects. And this, what we're aiming here to do is ensure that if we've had errors on previous projects and corrected them, that we don't reintroduce those same errors on new projects. And that's a subject to another conversation I recently had with a customer, where that had just happened, where an error that had crept into a previous project and fixed, then got repeated on the next project. And they said it just shouldn't have happened, but the cost of repeating that error was quite significant. And it really shouldn't have happened. On their own statement, it really shouldn't have happened. So this will motivate repeatable processes and support significant improvements in product quality at the same time as reducing the time to market. We're not having to reinvent big parts of the wheel again. So customer satisfaction also improves because key information becomes more accessible to everyone in the project that needs to access it. So you can become more responsive to queries or requests for change. The use of an integrated design environment will provide significant benefits in ensuring full traceability of your stakeholder and customer expectations throughout the design and implementation lifecycle. It allows your most valuable engineering resources to focus on the product design rather than the administration and the document production and the performance metrics reporting activities that are normally associated with projects. A shared working environment also encourages more integration and communication across engineering and project disciplines, where people share common design information but with very different viewpoints. But it's also important that we only give the people the information they need, which is related to their viewpoint, and don't give them a lot of information which is absolutely not relevant to their viewpoint, because you will lose their support and their interest in the project. As the requirements are directly linked to the physical and functional views of the solution, the impact of design change can be more quickly and clearly understood, actually in real time. This allows the project managers and engineers to make informed design decisions based on the facts available to them through this central repository. The cost of dealing with missed or errored requirements retrospectively during system integration or beyond has been proven in a standards report to be anything up to 200 times higher than trying to address those problems once the system or the product has been delivered to market. And all of us heard many examples in the motor car industry where cars have been delivered and fundamental errors, some of them safety critical, have been identified in a component after the car has gone to market. And as they must all be aware that the cost of rectifying those faults through product recalls and on-site repairs is significantly higher than if we'd managed to resolve or address some of those issues at the beginning of the project. So with that, that is the end of my presentation. I hope that you have found the information of value, and that you have found also that it's relevant to the current work that you're involved with and the activities you're involved with at the moment. So at this point, I would like to open out the floor to questions, and to answer any questions that you may have or any thoughts that you may have from the presentation that I've gone through. So I'll leave it a couple of minutes there to see what if anyone's going to ask any questions. And by the way, in the meantime, if you want to take any questions or raise any questions to me directly offline, you can see my contact information there, my email address at the bottom. That's pahewitt@visualsolutions.com, and my mobile number. So if there's anything you'd like me to take offline, then please feel free to contact me directly. So at the moment I don't have any questions, so I'll give it another little bit of time. And while you're thinking about it, if I can once again, thank all of you for your time in joining me today. I know your time is precious, and I thank you for your attendance and attention. I sincerely hope you found what I've said of value, and that you can take something away from this that you can relate to within your everyday activities. Well, at this point, I have to say either I've done such a good job when you can't think of any questions, or I've answered all the questions as part of my presentation. But I hope that you found the session of value, and I sincerely hope that we may work together again in the future. With that, I will end the session, and I hope that we can speak again soon. Okay, bye-bye for now, and thank you for your time. Okay, bye-bye.